Well, there's a specific kind of silence found only in the deep mountains of Japan. It is not a peaceful silence. It is not the absence of noise. It is a heavy, pressurized weight, a silence that feels like it is holding its breath, waiting for you to make a mistake. As well, locals in the Gifu prefecture call it Kamikakushi territory, places where people are spirited away. Well, they tell you not to stray from the paved roads. They as well tell you that if you see a Jizo statue with its head missing, you must bow and turn back immediately. As well, and most importantly, they tell you that if you find something left behind in an abandoned house, no matter how beautiful, how valuable, well, or how insignificant it seems, you must never, under any circumstances, take it with you. Well, in 2018, an American urban explorer named Elias Thorne and his Japanese translator, Kenji Sato, disappeared near the borders of the Shirakawa-go wilderness. Their camera equipment was found 3 weeks later, neatly placed on the steps of a local police box, wiped clean of fingerprints, where the memory cards were intact. The following story is a reconstruction of the events based on the recovered footage, Kenji's recovered journal, and the terrified testimony of hotel staff who saw them last. It begs the question, as well, if you hear something calling your name from the shadows of a forgotten village, what would you do? Well, why, dear God, should you never answer? The gaps on the rental car had given up an hour ago. Well, the digital map was a sea of gray nothingness, the blue arrow floating in a void. Well, Elias Thorne, didn't he care? Well, in fact, he was ecstatic. Well, he adjusted his thick-rimmed glasses and leaned over the center console, pointing through the windshield. There, you see that torii gate. It's rotting. That's the path. As well, Kenji Sato, gripping the steering wheel of the K-car until his knuckles turned white, looked at the overgrown trail. It wasn't a road. It was a scar in the forest, barely wide enough for a single vehicle, choked by creeping vines and towering cedar trees that blocked out the midday sun. Why, Elias, this isn't T on the map, Kenji said, his voice tight. As well, the locals at the gas station said the road to Minakami was washed out in the 90s. Well, they said nobody goes up there. Exactly, Elias grinned, checking the battery on his Sony-ass camera. That means it's sun-touched. A perfect Heikyo ruin. Think of the footage, Kenji. Well, the village time forgot. Well, be the viral hit of the year. Kenji sighed. He needed the money. Well, as a freelance translator in Tokyo, gigs were sporadic, and Elias paid in cash. He shifted the car into low gear and turned the wheel. The tires crunched onto the gravel, and instantly, the atmosphere in the car changed. Well, the air conditioning seemed to stop working, replaced by a humid, suffocating heat that radiated from the forest itself. They drove for 20 minutes in silence. The forest was too dense. While the cedar trees stood like prison bars, endless and identical. There were no birds, no cicada. Well, just the sound of the engine straining against the incline. Well then, the trees broke. Well, the village of Minakami didn't look abandoned. That was the first thing that unsettled Kenji. Well, Haikyo were reclaimed by nature, roofs collapsed, floors rotted, vines strangling the walls. But Minakami stood eerily intact. Well, about a dozen traditional wooden houses Minka sat nestled in the valley bowl. Well, the thatched roofs were gray with age but whole. The sliding paper doors shoji were closed. Well, in the center of the village stood a small shrine, painted a vermilion red that seemed shockingly bright against the dull greens and grays of the landscape. Well, Jackpot alias whispered. Well, they parked the car at the village entrance, near a stone monument covered in moss, so thick the inscription was illegible. They stepped out. As well, the air smelled of wet earth and something sweeter like rotting plums. Well, stay close, Kenji warned, grabbing his backpack. The floors might be weak. Well, and watch out for bears. Elias was already filming. Look at this place, guys, he narrated to the camera, his voice dropping to a dramatic whisper. Well, we are miles from civilization. It looks like they just left. They moved from house to house. Inside, it was a time capsule. In one kitchen, a dusty calendar from 1982 hung on the wall, while rice bowls were stacked neatly in the cupboard. What, in a living room, a child's backpack lay on a tatami mat, covered in a layer of dust that looked like gray snow. It was too perfect. Well, it didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused. Why leave all this? Well, Elias asked, zooming in on a vintage television set. Well, it's not like there was a fire or an earthquake. Everything is just here. Maybe they didn't have a choice, Kenji muttered. Well, he felt a prickling on the back of his neck. Well, he had the distinct sensation that they were being watched not by an animal, but by many eyes as well, peering through the slats of the closed wooden shutters of the surrounding houses. They reached the shrine at the back of the village. It was a small structure, flanked by two stone foxes kitsune that were missing their snouts. Ropes of straw shimenoa hung across the front, well adorned with jagged white paper lightning bolts that fluttered in a wind Kenji could feel. Why, I'm going in, Ilias said. Wait, Kenji grabbed his arm. Well, you shouldn't enter the inner sanctum. It's disrespectful. And the energy here is bad, Ilias. It's heavy. Elias laughed, shaking him off. Content, Kenji. As well, content. He stepped onto the wooden porch and pushed open the shrine doors. But they groaned, a sound like a dying animal. Inside it was dark. Dust motes danced in the beam of Elias's flashlight. The altar was simple. A mirror, a few dried branches, and in the center, a small wooden box. It was made of red lacquered wood, intricate and beautiful, about the size of a jewelry box. It was tied shut with a braided gold cord. Elias approached it. The camera lens focused on the box. Well, look at that craftsmanship, Elias whispered. This has to be Edo period, maybe older. Don't touch it, Kenji pleaded from the doorway. He refused to step inside. Well, the air in the shrine was freezing cold, despite the summer heat outside. Elias reached out. Well, his fingers brushed the red lacquer. Well, it's heavy, he said, lifting it. Something's inside. Well, Elias, put it back. Well, we were leaving. Now, Kenji's voice trembled. He wasn't a superstitious man, but every instinct in his DNA was screaming predator. Relax. I'm just gonna borrow it. Unbox it at the hotel, see what's inside, maybe get it appraised, and then we can mail it back or bring it back tomorrow. It's a great cliffhanger for the video, Kenji shouted. Well, but Elias had already shoved the box into his backpack. Let's go. This place is giving me the creeps anyway. As they walked back to the car, the silence of the village broke. Well, a sound echoed from the mountain ridge above them. Clack, clack. It sounded like two wooden blocks being struck together. Rhythmic, deliberate. What is that? Elias asked, stopping. Don't he look, Kenji hissed, shoving Elias toward the car. Just drive. Drive. As the car engine roared to life and they sped away, Kenji glanced in the rearview mirror. He saw the village shrinking behind them. When there, standing in the middle of the road where they had just been parked, was a figure. It was wearing white. It was tall, when it was waving. Well, the drive back to the city of Takayama was a blur of tension. Well, Elias was high on adrenaline, chatting endlessly about the footage, the lighting, the thumbnail for the video. Kenji didn't he speak. He kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see the white figure chasing them, but the road remained empty. As well, they checked into a traditional ryokan inn on the outskirts of the city. Well, the contrast was jarring, the safety of the warm lights, the polite staff, the smell of miso soup. It felt like waking up from a nightmare. Well, you're overreacting, man, Elias said as they sat in their tatami room. He pulled the red box out of his bag and set it on the low table. It's just a box. It's not just a box. It's a Yashiro vessel, Kenji said, refusing to sit near it. But in Shinto, objects can house spirits. If that box was sealed, it was sealed for a reason. Elias rolled his eyes and set up a tripod. Intro time. As well, hey guys, look what we found in the ghost village. But he reached for the gold cord. Don't open it! Kenji lunged forward, but he was too late. Elias pulled the cord. The knot unraveled with a hiss, like a snake uncoiling. Well, the lid of the box clicked and popped open a fraction of an inch. The room lights flickered. A smell hit them instantly. It wasn't the smell of wood or age. Well, it was the smell of the ocean salt water, rotting kelp, and stagnant mud. It was nauseatingly strong, filling the dry, air-conditioned room in seconds. Elias coughed, covering his nose. Okay, that reeks. What is that? He used a pen to pry the lid fully open. Inside the box lay a single object. It wasn't a gold. It wasn't a jewel. It was a clump of black hair. Long, coarse human hair, wrapped tightly around a small, white piece of bone. Elias stared at it, the color draining from his face. Was that a finger bone? Kenji stood up, backing away until his back hit the wall. Close it now. Elias hesitated, his bravado failing. He reached out to slam the lid shut, but before he could touch it, the hair moved. It wasn't a draft, where the windows were closed. The clump of hair shifted, expanding slightly, like a breathing lung. Elias slammed the box shut and retied the cord with trembling hands. Okay, weird. Maybe static electricity. Or maggots inside moving it. Well, we have to take it back, Kenji said, his voice deadly serious. At night, no way. We'll go tomorrow. Elias shoved the box deep into his suitcase and zipped it shut. I need a drink. Well, that night, Kenji couldn't sleep. He lay on his futon, staring at the ceiling. The smell of the ocean lingered faintly in the room. From Elias' side of the room, he could hear heavy, rhythmic breathing. At 2 a.m. the sound started. Clack. Well, clack. It was soft, coming from the corner of the room where the suitcase sat. Kenji froze. He held his breath. Clack. Then a new sound. A wet, slapping sound. Like wet bare feet walking on tatami mats. Slap. Slap. Kenji squeezed his eyes shut. Don't look. If you look, you acknowledge it. Well, if you acknowledge it, it can touch you. As well, this was the golden rule of dealing with the Yurei. Well, the footsteps stopped right beside Kenji's head. He could feel the cold radiating from whatever was standing there. What felt like standing next to an open freezer door. Well, he heard a drip. A drip. Well, water hitting the floor near his ear. A voice, dry and raspy, like dead leaves skittering on pavement, whispered a single word right into his ear. K's, return it. As well, Kenji screamed and bolted upright, fumbling for the light switch. The room flooded with fluorescent light. The room was empty. Elias was still asleep, snoring. But on the tatami mat, right beside Kenji's pillow, was a puddle of muddy water. As well, and in the center of the puddle was a single, long strand of black hair. Well, by morning, the situation had deteriorated rapidly. Elias didn't wake up. Well, when Kenji tried to shake him, Elias's skin was burning hot to the touch, yet he was shivering violently. His eyes were bloodshot, the capillaries burst, turning the whites of his eyes a terrifying crimson. Get up. We were going to the hospital, Kenji said, panic rising. Elias groaned, clutching his throat. Well, thirsty, so thirsty. Well, he grabbed a bottle of water and downed it in seconds, spilling it over his chin. Then another. And then he ran to the bathroom tap and drank directly from it. As well, it tastes like sand, Elias choked, coughing up clear fluid. Why is there sand in the water? But Kenji looked at the sink, where the water was clear. We are taking the box back, Kenji declared. Well, he went to the suitcase to grab the red box. It was gone. But Kenji tore the suitcase apart. Clothes, batteries, cables flew everywhere. The box was missing. Elias, where is it? Elias looked at him with glassy, delirious eyes. I threw it out last night. Well, it wouldn't stop clicking. I threw it in the dumpster outside. Kenji ran out of the room, down the stairs, and out to the back of the ryokan, where he found the metal dumpster. Well, he climbed inside, Digging through bags of kitchen waste and trash, he found nothing. Well, the box was gone. He climbed out, panting, wiping garbage from his hands. He turned to go back inside, but stopped. Sitting on the neatly swept concrete step of the back entrance, perfectly aligned with the door, was the red box. Where the gold cord was untied, Kenji felt his knees give out. What hadn't it been thrown away? Or rather it had, and it had come back as well. He grabbed the box. It felt vibratingly warm now, like flesh, and ran back to the room. We were going back to Minakami, Kenji said, bursting into the room. Now, Elias was sitting on the floor, staring at the corner of the room. Well, he was scratching his neck, scratching so hard that blood was trickling down his collar. Well, he's here, Kenji, Elias whispered. The man in white. Yes, in the corner. Kenji looked. The corner was empty. There's no one there, Elias. Get up. He says he wants his wife's hair back. He says I have to take her place. Well, Elias turned to look at Kenji. His face was slack, his jaw hanging unnaturally low. He says the box can be empty. Well, the drive back to the mountains was a descent into madness. A freak summer storm had rolled in, turning the sky a bruised purple. Rain lashed against the windshield, so heavy the wipers were useless. Well, Elias was in the passenger seat, clutching the red box to his chest. He was muttering in a language that wasn't English, and certainly wasn't Japanese. It sounded like a chant. Almost there, Kenji said, gripping the wheel, fighting the mud that threatened to slide the car off the cliff. We just put it back on the altar. We apologize. We leave. They reach the trailhead. The car couldn't go any further in the mud. We have to walk, Kenji said. Elias didn't move. Well, he was staring straight ahead, his eyes wide and unblinking. Elijah shook him. Elias blinked slowly. Well, it's so loud, he whispered, with a clapping. But can't you hear it? Kenji could hear it now. Well, over the roar of the rain coming from the deep woods. Clack, 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 hundreds of them. Not just one source, but from every tree, every shadow. But Kenji dragged Elias out of the car. They stumbled up the path. The forest felt alive. Well, the trees seemed to lean in, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. The mud sucked at their shoes, trying to pull them down into the earth. They reached the village. It was different in the storm. Well, the gray houses looked black, soaked with rain. Well, the doors that had been closed yesterday were now all slid open. And in the doorway of every single house, something stood. Shadows, vague human-shaped mists. They weren't moving. They were watching. Well, don't you look at them, Kenji screamed over the wind. Look at the shrine. Only the shrine. Well, they ran through the gauntlet of silent watchers. Kenji felt cold fingers brushing against his jacket, felt the breath of unseen things on his neck. Well, they reached the shrine. The doors were open. Put it back, Kenji yelled, shoving Elias toward the altar. Elias stumbled into the sanctuary. He held the box out, his hands shaking violently. He placed it on the altar. The wind suddenly died. The rain stopped. Absolute silence fell over the valley. Elias turned to Kenji, a look of clarity returning to his eyes. Is it over? As well, from the darkness behind the altar, a hand emerged. It was pale, bloated, and dripping with water. It reached out and rested gently on top of the red box. Then a second hand emerged. This one reached out and grabbed Elias' wrist. Elias screamed as well. He tried to pull away, but the grip was iron. "Can't help me!" Kenji lunged forward, grabbing Elias' other arm. He pulled, digging his heels into the wooden floor. The thing in the darkness was strong. It pulled Elias closer to the shadows. A face began to emerge, a mask. A white porcelain mask of a smiling woman, but cracked down the middle, oozing black sludge. The exchange, a voice echoed, not from the entity, but from inside Kenji's own head. "A vessel for a vessel, a bone for a bone. Let him go," Kenji screamed. He looked around for a weapon, a rock, anything. He saw the stone fox statue outside. "Kenji, it burns!" Elias shrieked. The hand on his wrist was smoking. His skin was turning gray, spreading up his arm like an infection. Elias looked at Kenji, tears streaming down his face. "Run, what?" Doesn't want the box," Elias gasped, his eyes rolling back. "It wants me." With a final surge of inhuman strength, the entity yanked. Elias flew backward into the darkness behind the altar. There was no wall there, just an infinite, deep black hole. His scream was cut short as the shrine doors slammed shut with the force of a thunderclap. Kenji threw himself at the doors. He pounded. He kicked. He screamed Elias' name until his voice gave out. The doors were locked, and from inside he heard a sound. Click, the sound of a wooden box latching shut. Then Ellen. Kenji Sato was found 2 days later, wandering down the highway, dehydrated and incoherent. The police investigated the area Kenji described. They found the car. They found the trail. But they couldn't find the village. Where Kenji claimed the village of Minakami stood, the police found only a dense thicket of bamboo and a small, landslide prone valley. There were no houses, no shrine. However, in the center of the bamboo grove, half buried in the mud, they found a single object, a red lacquered wooden box. The police opened it. Inside they found a clump of black hair. But wrapped inside the hair was not a finger bone. It was a pair of thick-rimmed glasses. Elias Thorne's glasses. The case remains open. Kenji refuses to speak about it. He lives in a small apartment in Osaka now. He covers all the mirrors in his home. He never travels to the countryside. He never, ever sleeps in a room with the closet door open. Because sometimes, on rainy nights, when the silence is heavy and the city noise fades away, he hears it. Clack, clack, coming from inside the walls. So I ask you again. If you see something beautiful in a place that has been forgotten by time, something that calls to you, something that begs to be taken. What would you do? Well, and are you prepared to pay the price of admission?